While some might focus on the societal effects of advertising, such as does it make society become more materialistic and more consumer conscious? One of the things that is really important also to understand is when we view advertising, we also have to consider its influence on our economy. So questions such as, does advertising make things cost more, is a great example that we're going to be looking into today. So today we're going to focus primarily on advertisers and the effects that it has on the economy. So advertisers do face lots of ramifications when it comes to legal ramifications, economic ramifications, and social ramifications and effects. So primarily what we do want to focus on is the economy. And does advertising affect the economic system, which we know as capitalism? Absolutely. As you'll see here, one of the biggest illustrations that you have in your textbook in reference to the economy's effects on advertising, it almost sets off a chain reaction. This is in reference to if you've ever played pool, billiards, and your break shot. This is exactly what that is. So the illustration really expresses how advertising can have that societal effect on the rest of the economy. So if a campaign begins by iPhone, right, that is the advertiser, they then push that campaign into several touch points. And as the integrated marketing communications uh, plan would suggest, is going to hit several media platforms. And then it gets to us at several touch points in our device, on commercials, on print media ads, things of that nature. So it's also going to benefit the actual business community. So the trade customers, the which then ventures into the retail outlets. So your T-Mobile stores and Apple stores. Okay, so a lot of what is happening in the beginning with the advertising of a new iPhone, for example, is going to trickle down into having this effect like a billiard shot would into then the organizations such as the suppliers, the wholesalers, the manufacturers, all the way down into the second and third tier, which could be even your flea market, your local flea market. Individuals would then be able to have a stake in this. So a lot of what is happening with advertising campaigns really sets off the rest of the economy to allow it to flourish and to flow. That is what the proponents of those that look at the advertising world in this way, it argues that there are many benefits around starting an advertising campaign. And they would also argue that whatever company is producing a product, say Apple, that only 2% of the overall budget to operate the company is actually spent on advertisements. So advertising does affect the value of products. It affects the pricing, competition, and consumers. So the effects that it has on the value of a product, advertisers are the uh, the necessary catalyst, if you will, to give brands their added value. We talk a lot about how advertising will create this association principle where it establishes a connection and a relationship with a product. So it does add value. It increases the worth of a product or even a service that is being communicated through these ads, talking about how it benefits over other products, how it can create a positive image for someone and a more desirable to consumers if they begin to build a narrative. It also educates consumers about, how to use a new product. For example, the Arm & Hammer baking soda was never really used for as a deodorizer for refrigerant or refrigerator odor until there became a campaign for it, and the discovery then was communicated through advertising campaigns. So it also allows consumers to communicate who they are, and it allows you and I to build an identity through the products that we use and that we consume. For example, this is a classic piece of print advertising that is done by Nike to build the product value through their campaigning. As you can see, the effects on advertising is also another impact that we see on pricing. So there's a small part of a product's cost, which, you know, the textbook would argue that it takes about 2% of the overall cost to run the business to actually do the advertising, and depending on what advertising platforms you use, because television is still very expensive. So but still, it enables mass production for many companies that are a corporation, regulates industries that really set a price, and then in some extent the competitors begin to either match that price or even lower their price. So it actually, many would argue that it has a positive effect on pricing. And retailing advertising contributes to both higher and lower pricing. So in some instances, there may be a campaign for a weekend sale or a tax-free weekend, for example. But it could require that in order to compete with that, smaller businesses may have to lower their prices, which then they take a loss during a certain part of the year, and then they end up raising their prices a little bit later on when things become a little bit more scarce. And so the effects of pricing go two-way. It's a two-way street, but it's also mentioned in the textbook as well. And for example, when a new iPhone comes out, the pricing of the old version obviously is going to diminish. And so it's also a matter of when the new advertising comes out and for what product it is. And so especially in the cell phone business, you can see this pattern. When the new phone comes out, it's going to be at its highest peak price. The competitor will come along, which usually is Samsung, and maybe lower their price. Okay, and then in turn, the older versions of these phones tend to go on sale. So advertising also has an effect on competition. Big advertisers have a limited effect on competition in small businesses. There is a freedom to advertise that encourages more sellers to enter the market. And so because of the platforms that these small businesses have, these smaller based competitions can advertise locally versus nationally, and even non-advertised store brands can possibly even compete with nationally advertised brands such as Trader Joe's, which you hardly ever see a commercial for, compared to the regional monster known as H-E-B. Okay, so there's a lot of effects that it can have on, you know, these smaller businesses that are trying to compete. In essence, maybe their advertising campaign or strategy tends to be more local in, say, homeowners associations, newsletters, or maybe they take to Facebook or Twitter and do things a little bit more differently there. So advertising, because of the proliferation of it, it has allowed for these companies to venture out and be more creative, to compete at a better pace with these larger companies. And last and certainly not least, advertising does have an effect on consumers and businesses. Studies show that promotional activity does affect aggregate consumption, but they disagree as to the extent of its influence. And so some of the points here is that in a growing market, advertising provides more complete information. It stimulates primary demand and consumer demand for a whole product category. And it also helps businesses compete for a share of the growing market. So for the longest time, these cell phones, these smart devices, were a growing market. And so you began to see that there was much more complete information on how it works, what it can do, and now we know what it can do, and therefore we have flooded the market with these devices. And so many would argue, economists would argue, that at some point we're going to begin to see a decline in these products, in these smart devices. And what ends up happening there, just like you see with the car business, is that there's a declining market, so the advertising content has to change. So mainly they provide price information, and so you're starting to see that with the iPhone as well. You're starting to see the influence of selective demand, which is the consumers are demanding for their particular advantages of one brand over another. For example, you're seeing the promotion of different types of cameras and how the camera works better than others and helps businesses compete with each other in market share. So here's a primary example of those ads that we see in television that would promote a declining market, which is the car business. So in essence, this kind of captures all of what I wanted to say, which is the abundance principle, and it's an economy that produces more goods than actually can be consumed in an effort to allow advertising to serve two purposes. One, that it informs consumers of their alternative competition and gives complete information, and so it serves that purpose. And it also allows companies to compete more effectively, which then results in more and better products at a similar and or lower price. That is the capitalist argument, that advertisements can provide this kind of environment. So there you have it. These are the effects of advertising on the economy.